that's on there. But again, I will walk you through this and point out particular sections to pay attention to. And so the learning objective today, as I talk with you, is more or less just to know that instead of just informed consent, you have in your head to add voluntary informed consent process. So you know it's not about just the documentation or the signature. It's about from the beginning, the preparation to do this, and also, it's a understanding that it is a two-way communication between the human subjects and your research team. And so, as we talk about the informed consent process, we step back and think, okay, who's responsible? Is it the one person who goes in the room? Is it the person who sits down with the human research subject? Is it the person who writes the protocol? It's all of us. It is everyone at Carillion Clinic who is participating in a certain aspect with getting a participant or human subject. You know, those words are interchangeable as we think of it because participants are more or less in the goal with you. A human subject may or may not always have the ability or understanding to know the end goal of the research, but overall, they are the person who is consenting voluntarily to take part in your study. And so, all of us together, the team, the IRB, the HRPO office, all of us are responsible for making sure that it is absolutely the informed consent, the voluntary informed consent process. And so, a lot of this training today, I hope you walk away with the understanding that it's not about just a signature. It's a process that has been pre planned, it's organized, and everyone knows what to do within their delegation of responsibility with this. On the right hand screen, the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that it's a comprehensive process and all of the key elements. But again, you'll see the voluntary agreement and it's ongoing communication as you go through each step of this. And so, again, this is just a reminder of the regulatory framework that informed consent falls under. Again, our office is here just as a supporter and also the ones to help you understand more about what is the regulations say specifically and how Carillion Clinic has interpreted it and applied it towards our research in the institution. And so I'm a visual person and I always think it helps, but this shows how it is literally a process and it's a circle because it keeps going. You have the reconsent, you have, throughout the study, it's not just signature and done. It is continuous communication and it looks more like a channel to where it keeps looping, but it is, again, you have the information, the discussion, the voluntary part, and then the consent authorization. But then it continues back because you still have to provide that information. Your study may change. One person says the only constant in research is change, and that's true. And so you have to be aware of that as you plan this. And so, elements of the process, as you see at the top left of your screen, it begins with recruitment. You should start thinking about the process when you even think about the recruitment of your human research subjects. The FDA and Carillion requirements, we must know who actually will be conducting the consent process. And that's also something that needs to be determined at the beginning. It's not about who's available. There's a really good person that was just seen that might be interested. And so quick, grab somebody. That's not at all how it should be. It is a planned, delegated role, and this person has prepared for it, or people, should I say. And the people who are determined to be the team members and especially the principal investigators, this is a thought out process to they know how they're going to approach it. And they know that each time it's different because each subject is going to be different and their understanding or their background, it always varies. It's not a robotic process. And so the document more or less serves as a basis to have that meaningful exchange between the research team and the human research subject. In that, it is your responsibility to summarize and to cover each section of the informed consent process. And again, that documentation, it is the protection. It is the protection that is a ripple effect from the human research subject back to the research team to the institution. And so, again, think of it as a purpose to help guide you and cover all bases and even keep copies so everyone knows this is what we're doing, this is our roadmap. And so, the informed consent document, the basic elements, there are several, and these are by regulatory guidelines. We always say that regulations are the minimum, that we always do above and beyond. But these are the essential elements that you have to have in the documentation and your informed consent document. On the right, there's also additional elements, and that really applies study by study. So you have to know your study. But the part I want to point out right now is the voluntary participation statement. That also needs to be discussed and talked about so the human research subject knows they have the right to refuse or withdraw without penalty at any time. That this really is two-way again, that this isn't what is best for them. This is not a treatment. They don't have to feel like they are siloed or they are in it, that at any time it is up to them the right to refuse and withdraw. That needs to be emphasized. And so, as you're drafting the consent form and you're like, oh gosh, there are so many elements. There are so many elements. And again, you have to think of that protection. But our office does provide, and I'm going to show you as I drag it to the screen. Our office does provide a lot of consent templates and guidance. As you can see, it is on our website, Carillion Clinics IRB, and it provides several different guidance documents here that'll help you with every component. And then we even have templates that you can go into and pull off that are Word documents that fit your team's need. And these are all in red font, so you even know what parts to edit. So this is very good to have as a bookmark or even a starting place for you and your team to make the consent form as you have a draft. Another part, as an educator, I really want to point out to you is the average American adult reads at a 7th to 8th grade reading level. And this quote is from the United States Department of Education. I pulled it from there because they are the experts at literacy in general. They have to keep these studies every year. They do research of their own to see, on average, where is the average American reading. With that, you have to understand that's their reading level. So think words on a piece of paper, but other factors that really correlate to that is the comprehension of it, is their ability to understand certain words you use. And so please remember, as you were discussing with them, basic vocabulary, explaining things, and especially reading their nonverbal responses and body language to see if they actually do know the words that you're using. We have a standard operating guideline that gives you specific what also has to do with certain elements of the consent form, like the font size and your grammar and sentence structure. So all of these things need to be considered as you think about, again, the voluntary informed consent of your research subject. So again, readability, it is different for everyone. I can tell you that. Readability, though, if we want to kind of hone in on specific elements that helps everyone, is short, simple, and direct sentences, using active words, and also the realization, I'm skipping over here to the right-hand side where it says use the second person you and not third person. Again, that just helps them know that you are directly talking to them. This correlates to their life, to their future, and what they're going to do now, to where when you use third person, it almost seems like it may not correlate to them, or you're telling them a story or something that's possible, to where they need to know the direct impact it has on them and their lives, or even their families' lives, depending on the study. Um, Also, it's very helpful if you can make the consent documents longer, no more than 4 pages, but if they are, you always have to begin with a concise summary. And some of you are thinking, of course, it's going to be longer than 4 pages. Just know that your team from the beginning needs to have a concise summary to just give an overview. Think of it as a preview or a trailer to this movie, to where you need to have it summarized of what the study is about. And so, we've talked about the prep, the document, and all that. So you have your documentation, you've used a consent form, it's been drafted. And so now is the planning of even approaching the patient. I mentioned this before, but it cannot just be oh, I have time now, or they seem like a good prospect, so I'm going to do it now. No, it needs to be a planned thing. It needs to be something to where time is valued and there is enough time to explain it to the person. And so the research team members and the principal investigator who have been designated as the people who are doing the informed consent process, they need to know the protocols. They need to know what was written in there and what needs to be said. They also need to factor in the time as to, does the parent need to be there? Does a legal authorized representative need to be there? Again, that's knowing your research subject. And you also need to make sure the right consent form is there, if it has the stamp on it from the IRB. And also, you need to make sure your supporting documents are always there on hand, because if you have that moment to where you just forget, or you want to recheck something, or basically make sure that you are going in prepared, you need to make sure your protocol, the informed consent documentation checklist, and your inclusion and exclusion checklist is there as well. So you've prepared, your documentations are there, and so now you're advancing it to actually facilitating the presentation of the consent form. And you're probably thinking, oh, presentation, that's an interesting word. But honestly, it is, because you have to be able to present the information in a way that the person in that room with you understands it. And so it's going to be a lot of information. And hopefully, right now, you're engaged. The way I'm speaking to you, I'm delivering information. Of course, this is very one way. I would like to have feedback from you, or a head nod. And, that's important to know. If you feel like you are doing one way, to where you're just shoving so much information at them that you're the one talking the most, you need to evaluate the way you're doing the process. And so facilitating that, again, it's a two-way street. And so you need to be able to explain to them the difference between the research side, the study you want them involved in, versus their standard of care. You need to hear their concerns. If you notice nonverbal cues that, they seem puzzled, or they just keep shaking their head, to where it might be an overwhelmed, instead of, yes, I understand, instead it might be like, oh my goodness, this is a lot. So all the way through it, encourage questions, understand that from the beginning. You also need to adapt to the person in the room, to where, hopefully before you've done your research, to where, if they're quiet, if they are very self-assured, and all of that helps with the facilitating of the presentation of all this information you need to go over. And again, you have to go over each section in detail. And so the easiest way to do that is, again, the two-way, to make it seem like a conversation. It's dialogue. It is not just a one-way thing, video or training that you're doing, to where you cannot see the other side. Again, it's two ways. And so one method that really helps with this is the teach back method. There are several ways you can approach this, but this needs to be something that is practiced within your research study team. Even as a principal investigator, you need to run through this to where you've practiced the teach back method. It's not questions that would basically have a yes no response. You need to be trained on questions that it's open ended, to where you can really gauge if they understand what you just said. Did you break down the medical jargon good enough to where it was able to be comprehended by the person? Did you put it in simple enough terms? And so the teach back method walks you through how to do that, and examples of phrases down below. You can see the questions at the bottom of this slide. They are not questions that you would just get a yes, no. There are good ones to where, what will you tell your spouse about the three most important things we discussed today? They should be able to have three. You may know from the get-go that you would not say spouse, because that person in the room does not have a spouse. If you are asking these questions or at the teach back method, you should know the person in the room enough to know, do they have a spouse? Do they have family members? Have you established enough background about their own life to even, personalize these questions to ask them? Again, these are more just questions and prompts to use during the consent process. And as a reminder, you have to establish that interpersonal relationship. Part of best practices is having someone do the consent process to where there is an interpersonal relationship, but we fully understand that may not always be the case. You may have to walk in the room and establish that. That, again, is another factor of timing. This is not something that can be quick. Um, where you say, where will the study take place? If they answer something like here, or one word answers, again, that's your responsibility to go and further press for information. If they give a one word answer, that should not be adequate enough for you as part of the teach back method. As part of where will it take place, look for the specific room, look for the specific building or a specific day of the week and information you've given them to see if they can repeat that back to you. So, as you do the teach back method, it's not always going to be easy. And I'm sure that some of you are like, yes, already this is overwhelming. But everybody naturally has a barrier to understanding on any given day. I mean, all of us today, depending on how we woke up, we may have a barrier just as we've had an eventful day, an eventful weekend, but think if a human research subject is there in a healthcare facility, anyways, they already have some mental barriers of what's going on in their life. And so on the screen, you'll see four different categories that situations or specific elements fall under that you have to factor in so you don't make these a barrier. You think of ways to accommodate them. You think of ways to make them feel comfortable. You've done your research beforehand and you understand their background to, again, support them in this two-way communication for the process that you're actually doing with them. Again, it's not to them, it is with them. We've already talked a little bit about level of education, but I mean, age is definitely a factor in it, social and cultural factors. All of this needs to be factored in when you even talk about the recruitment of it or the process, to where how are you, again, I emphasize you, going to adjust to that person in the room that you are doing the voluntary informed consent with. And so you feel good about it, you've done your background, you feel like you've had this good conversation with them and that they clearly understand your study and the next steps, how they participate. And so they've given you verbal, like, okay, yes, I would like to. They've authorized consent. And so now you get to the signature part. Because again, that's not what this process is about. The signature is finalized to where all the information was fully explained. And so there are specific elements of the signature and even the way it is set up on the consent form that is here on the screen. One important factor you have to remember is, I am going to read this bullet, is the principal investigator or the authorized member of the research team. So again, we've already established that only the people that have been designated on your IRB study submission and the application that has been approved to do the consent process, they're the only people that have oriented and obtained consent must also sign and date the consent form after the subject signs on the same day before any research procedures can take place. So again, I just wanted to point that out because timing is a factor. Everyone involved in it that you have to gain signatures from have to sign that same day. Okay. And again, there's other very vital specifications on this page. So please pause the video or read the PDF version of this training. And so if you think of it as a simple process, you would think of it as this equation on the slide. That is the only way that it equates to no audit findings. Documentation is everything. A lot of the time, if you don't have quality information, which is found on your documentation, you don't have a quality study because the documentation is, again, the protection. Those correlate directly together. As you can see, the note at the bottom, the documentation and research and or the medical record is a note describing the consent process, documentation that the subject receive a copy of the signed consent form. And again, it's develop that template, develop the template for that. We have templates that help serve as a checklist that you can even take with you and have as part of your process. This is the consent process checklist. You'll see specific things. And again, it's just another guide. All of us, we have a lot on us now. And so I love a checklist. I love a good checklist to where you also feel accomplished by being able to check it off. And again, the goal is quality information that comes from the documentation that leads to the success of the study. I did a post-it note here that's, again, just another place to find the consent process checklist in PRISM. And you do this with your most recently approved consent form. You're going to have to make revisions to your consent form. And again, it's part of your responsibility to check the date and make sure you're using your most up-to-date approved IRB approved consent process form. And so we've talked about this. And I hope at this time you're like, yes, I know it's a process. It is a process. So a process never really ends necessarily until your study would be concluded. And sometimes even with that, you have specifications you're going to do, but it's continuing. These are all things to consider. And also just know that a research study or a human research subject, excuse me, I've talked so much now. They always have the ability to communicate with you, and they need to know that from the beginning. They need to know that after every appointment, to where it is your job to reassess their desire to continue after each time you see them, after their planned visits. Or maybe not, maybe if it's, longer lapses of time between, you need to reach out to your human research subjects and make sure that they're being communicated with, they're still okay with this, and not just look at their diary to where you're actually talking to them, and follow the protocol and make sure they still are as well. So after you've obtained consent, it's always good to have some type of tracking tool for your participants. This is something that would make it easy for you to identify for the participants, and also know at stages in your study, you may have to readjust. They may have to change certain things in a protocol, may have to be modified. And so again, you need to know if you're going to have to do that re-consent form. Do you see how this is a process now to where when things change, who needs to be directly communicated that? Of course, the people who are actually voluntarily participating within your study. Within the process is reconsent. One important aspect I want to point out to you right now is that individual autonomy. We talk about this often in the institutional review board, and it's one of the founding principles is what our whole office is about. And so each opportunity you see that participant, it is also the opportunity to get them to verbally confirm and again just authorize that and consent that they've already given you. This is also an opportunity to you know assess their capacity and has anything changed. Another factor to consider with reconsent is any new information. An important thing to note about this is we have it in blue on the slide is from the IRB and the approval letter. Did you thoroughly read all the way through that? Is there a time that the IRB has specified reconsent? Some of it may be planned and specified. Some you may have to plan yourself because new information has arrived in the form of an unanticipated problem, changes in the research that might affect the results, and just information that, again, needs to be conveyed to the research subject. And so now we're going to just go into a little bit of planning and best practices. And so on everybody's mind, it is how to not make mistakes. How can we really work to make sure that we are protecting and doing the right thing through all of this? And so the principal investigator is the one that is solely responsible for the entire IRB application process, which includes the beginning with recruitment. They always should be the leader and the one in the know and inform their team. The team supports this by being organized and also establishing one place where that IRB approved updated application or informed consent, I'm sorry, not application, informed consent document is located. And so other factors that also help avoid any deficiencies is just confirming again throughout the research team that everyone is on the same page. And we can say even literally everyone knows the exact informed consent document to use. Revisions may happen, and they should have the date and the IRB stamp of approval on it. And so where's that updated document? This helps you with audits and also the team knowing what to do because they were trained. You had a plan prior to this. And so when you have all of these factors and all of these processes regimented and they're planned, when auditors and monitors come in, you want them to not find anything. You want them to find a solid foundation that you have created with quality documentation. And so that includes, of course, informed consent documents. They want to see that the consent process has been thoroughly documented all the way through. How did you implement any changes the IRB may have given you? And so there are several bullets to consider as you go through this and kind of form a checklist as to, are we doing everything so when an auditor comes in, their words are, you're doing great. The monitors, when they come in and check, we don't see any problems. That is ultimately the goal that helps you with informed consent. So there's little instances, and hopefully they're little and not big, but mistakes will happen. So what happens with that? You make a note to the file. The example is here on our screen, but also in any cases to where you just question what to do, the IRB office is always there to answer your questions. You can send an email, you can request a meeting, whatever needs to happen specifically for your team's needs. Our IRB office is there to help. And so from our office, here's just some tips. The most important factor that we really want to emphasize is we do have templates available on the website. We are fully aware that the informed consent process is a very intricate, rigorous process. And so we are here to help you through that with the templates or even just a consultation sometimes of how to plan it if that is what you need. Another big factor is please always remember to proofread. Not only your eyes need to be on it, but your other team's eyes. As many people on the team can look at this to make sure every aspect is covered. One mind is better. 2 minds, 3 minds, more minds are better than just one person looking at it. And so again, the success depends on all of us. That means that we've made a process that is thoroughly granting autonomy for all human research subjects. And so we're all in this together. It's the ripple effect. Protect the patient, protect the researcher, protect the institution. And so it's really that understanding of every interaction is different and you have to be adaptable to that. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email us or contact our office, and we really appreciate everything you do.